Good morning. Welcome to today's informational webinar to provide updates on the PNOC ATRT Registry. Thank you to viewers from around the US and around the world for joining us today. I'm Bruce Campbell and co-founder of PNOC Foundation with my wife, Alan, after our son, George, was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Our vision of PNOC is to lose no child to brain cancer and to improve the quality of life for those fighting and surviving pediatric brain cancer. PNOC Foundation is unique in that it's the only 501c3 dedicated exclusively to supporting the Pacific Pediatric Neuro-Oncology Consortium, otherwise known as PNOC. For those of you joining us for the first time, PNOC is an international consortium with centers within the United States, Europe, Asia, and Australia. PNOC brings together the world's best pediatric brain cancer doctors and researchers to accelerate treatment breakthroughs. PNOC is dedicated to bringing new therapies to children and young adults with brain tumors by translating the latest findings in brain tumor biology into better treatments. Since PNOC was founded in 2012, its innovation has rapidly changed the landscape of pediatric brain cancer research and clinical trials. PNOC's opened 27 clinical trials for the deadliest pediatric brain cancers since inception. In 2019, PNOC established disease-specific working groups with the main intent to bring clinicians, scientists, philanthropy, and families together to enhance clinical trial development. The ATRT working group brings together the world's leading physicians and scientists who have expertise in ATRT and who are dedicated to improving the outcomes of children with these tumors. They feel very strongly that the best way to understand a rare disease such as ATRT is to gather as much data as possible and have that data evaluated by a collection of expert physicians and scientists. Today, you'll hear from the two leading principal investigators of the ATRT working group about the ATRT registry. But first, we want to acknowledge all the patient families and ATRT advocates joining us today. Many of you have been involved in the incredible fundraising effort that has occurred since we launched the dedicated fundraising campaign for the ATRT registry in March this year. The ATRT community has inspired so many to give in so many ways, from hosting charity basketball and softball games, running marathons, hosting jewelry store fundraisers, gathering the support of NASCAR drivers, and sharing your stories with your communities on social media. We thank you, and we are here to support any current and future fundraising ideas you have for the ATRT registry. Feel free to reach out to PNOC Foundation via email, myself, my wife, Alan Campbell, with any ideas about fundraising. We're here to help and support. It's my great pleasure to introduce two of the world's most esteemed ATRT experts. Dr. Ashley Margol is a pediatric neuro-oncologist who specializes in the care of infants, children, and young adults with brain and spinal cord tumors. She holds a master's degree in clinical biomedical and translational research from the Keck School of Medicine and has continued her career in clinical and translational pediatric brain tumor research. She is an attending physician in the neuro-oncology program and division of hematology, oncology, and blood and marrow transplantation at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, and an assistant professor of pediatrics at the Keck School of Medicine at the University of Southern California. Dr. Margol is the principal investigator of the PNOC ATRT research group. Dr. Alyssa Reddy is a pediatric neuro-oncologist with more than 20 years of experience in diagnosing and caring for children with central nervous system tumors. She has specific clinical and research interest in neurofibromatosis and embryonal tumors in very young children. As a PNOC member, Dr. Reddy is involved in the development and conduct of cutting-edge clinical trials with the goal of improving long-term survival and quality of life for patients. She believes these goals are best accomplished through a collaborative approach from a diverse team of scientists and healthcare providers with the ability to offer new therapies through clinical trials. She is the co-principal investigator of the PNOC ATRT research group. It's my pleasure to hand the session over to Dr. Reddy and Dr. Margol.
Bruce, thank you very much for that nice intro. And again, it's just to echo what Bruce said, it's really wonderful to have all the families and parents and advocates here with us. You are the reason that we are here, really. And I just wanted to kind of recap what we had done as a group in the past. So we had our first webinar in May of 2019. I believe that for anyone that's interested, they still can hear that. I think, really what we reviewed then and we continue, to know is that we have made a lot of progress in understanding the biology of ATRT in the last 30 years and the emergence of subgroups and really trying to understand what's going on with those. We've made progress in treatment. We know that patients remain at very high risk for recurrence. And unfortunately, despite a lot of effort and some improvement, ATRT does still remain a deadly disease. We also know that for children who survive with our current treatments, there are many side effects that can occur. And so when we first met, we put together, sort of this call to arms. We know that there are several clinical trials, including the one that I led through the Children's Oncology Group, that really do show improvements and have shown some suggestions of prognostic indicators. But as we learn more and more about the biology, it was very obvious to us that it's really critical that we have a larger data set where we can really better understand how the treatments affect patients, and also better ways to hone therapies for these patients. So again, as Bruce has said, our patient families, parents, advocates, and our patients themselves are just so instrumental in the process. They're the reason we're here. They have really driven the desire and supported the desire to put together this really larger data set. And I know many of you have done, as Bruce alluded to, you've done fundraisers, you've done advocacy. I just wanted to give a shout out to the Wilkersons, Angelia and Robert. They received the PNOC Award for Recognition and Contribution and Commitment last weekend for their work with the ATRT Working Group and with the registry. So I think it just shows what a great group we have, and we look forward to growing this. And with that, turn it over to Ashley.
Thank you so much, Alyssa, and thank you, Bruce, for the introduction and all the important work that PNOC Foundation does to support the work that we do and really help us to be successful. So I wanted to start today just by bringing us back to kind of why we're doing this in the first place. And we really, as Bruce alluded to, we put together these working groups in PNOC to really kind of bring the best minds together, and a lot of those minds include your minds. So as everyone has said, and I'll continue to reiterate, we're very grateful for the partnership of the families of this community. So the ATRT working group consists of a large number of physician scientists, clinicians, clinical researchers, and our disease champions. And really, we've got representation from around the world, which, as you can imagine, makes scheduling meetings a little bit tricky with some people on calls in the middle of the night. But we're very grateful for the collaborative nature of this group, and we've come a long way, and I think we're all really excited about that. And when we established this group, we had a brainstorming session to really set our goals. And so I think it's always good to start with remembering what those are. And so we decided that the goals of the working group were to better understand factors that affect outcomes for these children, identify best therapies, increase awareness and funding, and support all of the families of the children with ATRT. And so we chose to focus on 2 projects to help us accomplish that. And the first, as you all are aware, was to develop an ATRT registry. And the other one was to develop a clinical trial for patients with relapsed or progressive disease. So we'll talk about both of those today with a focus on the registry mostly. So again, Alyssa alluded to this, but we did have this call to arms by the community, and we had some very specific goals. And we wanted to improve data collection and data sharing across the scientific community. We felt like methylation profiling and molecular subgroup information is going to be important moving forward. And so we wanted to make that information available to all families and treating physicians. We still feel like it's very important, and we have a little ways to go to identify prognostic variables. We are really looking to develop timely, non-randomized clinical trials for these patients and identify novel therapies, including immunotherapy, to improve outcomes. So we'll review quickly the registry design and talk a little bit about that in the next few minutes. So the registry is designed into a number of separate cohorts. So the first cohort is what we call the retrospective cohort. And these are patients who have already been treated for ATRT. So they were previously diagnosed, and they have one of the following available. Either they have tumor tissue available at their treating institution. They had tissue that was previously submitted to the CBTN, or they had molecular subgroup information that was determined either locally or by the NIH or by another institution. We do know that there are several institutions who are doing this, including Sick Kids in Toronto. So if you have any of those, then the patients are eligible for enrollment. And this includes children of bereaved families as well. And then in this cohort, we are also going to be adding existing data sets. So there's a data set of ATRT patients that exists in CBTN. And then Alyssa and I have worked to establish a couple of other cohorts of children who were treated as per the COG protocol that she ran. And then there's the prospective cohort. So these are patients that are newly diagnosed or currently undergoing therapy for ATRT, as well as patients with relapsed, refractory, or progressive disease. And this little chart refers to that group of patients. So you've got two groups. Let's see if I can use my arrow here. So these are patients that are newly diagnosed. They can enroll at any time during their therapy, and we will be collecting their clinical data and then also the tumor tissue for molecular analysis. The patients can undergo any upfront therapy as determined by the family and the treating physician, and then they'll enter, ongoing follow-up, and we'll continue to follow them. If at any time the patient relapses, then they kind of switch over to this group over here, which I'll talk about in just a minute. So patients can also enroll in this cohort, and this is patients that were previously treated and now have relapsed disease or disease that didn't respond to therapy. And so again, we'll be collecting their clinical data and their tumor tissue for molecular analysis. At that point, any patient who is initially enrolled on this arm and has relapsed disease, or they're enrolling for the first time at the time of relapse, can opt for a tumor board recommendation. And I think I have that in the next slide. 2 slides I have it. So we'll talk about the tumor board in just a minute. But first, I want to just explain a little bit about the tissue for molecular analysis, as this is something that we know is important to treating physicians and patients and families. So we know that some patients have been able to have tumor tissue analyzed for molecular subgroup, and other patients have not. And some of that has to do with insurance coverage for tests such like this. So we really wanted to make this available to all patients with ATRT. So when the tumor tissue is submitted through the registry, the tissue will actually be sent to the CBTN, or the Children's Brain Tumor Network, which is going to be kind of like the biobank where all the tissue and specimens are stored. The molecular profiling will be performed at the NIH, and then that information will be provided back to the treating physician, who will then be able to share it with patients and families. So to go back to the optional tumor board, again, this is for patients with relapsed or progressive disease or refractory disease, so disease that didn't respond to treatment. And the tumor board will be made up of the registry study team that includes Dr. Reddy and myself, other members of the PNOC ATRT working group, including Dr. Chi, Dr. Rob, who's our physician scientist, our lead physician scientist, and other physician scientists and clinicians who are in the working group. Any PNOC members at large, which will likely include many of the treating physicians. But then if the treating physician is at a non-PNOC institution, they're asked and welcome to join. At that tumor board, we will review all the patient's clinical history. We'll review all the imaging, the MRIs. We'll also review the pathology and the molecular subgroup information. And then the tumor board will make broad treatment recommendations that will be provided to the treating physician, and then the treating physician will be able to share them with the family. So what are we going to do with all this registry data? And the goal is to really accomplish two things. One is to answer questions about prognostic variables and what is the role of molecular subgroup. So for example, can we identify clinical or pathologic features that help us predict which patients will have better or worse outcomes that could potentially help us in future study design? Does molecular subgroup play a role in prognosis? We think so, but we don't know for sure. And if it does, how so? And are there certain groups of patients that respond better to certain therapies? Right now, we don't really understand that, and we'd really like to. And then the second major goal of this registry is to establish an external control cohort for future studies. And I am going to do my best to explain to you what that means on the next slide. So typically when we think about bringing a new therapy into the treatment space, we think about doing what's called a randomized controlled trial. And typically what that means is that patients would enroll on the study, and then they would be randomized to either receive one therapy, which is typically what we consider like the standard of care therapy. In some studies, you may hear that patients are assigned to a placebo group, but essentially not the treatment group. And then the other patients are assigned to the actual treatment that we're trying to look at. And there's a couple of issues with doing a study like that. Number one is it takes a lot of patients because only half of those patients are actually getting the therapy. The other thing is that half of the patients aren't getting the therapy that we're looking at. And that can be very distressing to both treating physicians, those of us designing clinical trials, as well as parents. And so we, Dr. Prados and I have been involved in a number of efforts trying to work with regulatory agencies and others to come up with some standards around using what we call an external control cohort. So the goal of that is that rather than randomizing patients to the therapy that we're investigating versus this control arm, we would create this control arm from a database of patients. So I tried to put an example here. So for example, if we were interested in the therapy specifically for patients who had gross totally resected, non-metastatic sonic hedgehog ATRT, instead of, again, enrolling patients to both the control arm and the treatment arm, we would go dig in our database and we would pull out all of those patients that met those criteria, and that would make up this control arm. I don't want to make this sound like it's an easy task. It's not, and we are trying very hard to be very diligent about the amount of information that we collect. We've actually met with the FDA to kind of review all the data that we're going to be collecting, because we want to do this the right way so that this database and this cohort can really help us design more efficient clinical trials in the future that may be able to avoid randomization and hopefully be able to bring new drugs to market faster. And we think we've got a really good shot of doing that. So to give you an update on the registry timeline, we're very excited. We are very, very close to opening the study. We think that we're going to have initial IRB approval in the upcoming months, and then the study will open first at UCSF and very shortly after at CHLA. We'll talk about why that's important in a minute. And then we're hoping to open it at all the other PNOC sites in the spring. I also wanted to just mention quickly that while we're waiting for the other sites to open, we're going to be working on our end to integrate the data that already exists in the CBTN. So there's already 124 patients with ATRT that are enrolled in CBTN, which is fantastic. And we're really working closely with CBTN leadership to make sure that all of the data that we're interested in collecting has been collected. And if not, they're going to be going back to the sites to actually get that data. And then you can see here the CBTN has already started doing some genomic work, some molecular characterization of these samples, and they're going to continue to do so. So once the study is open, we will have a recruitment flyer. It will look something like this. This is the near final version, but this will be approved by the IRB and will be able to be shared. And so Rachel and company will be passing this along on social media and other sites to help us inform families about some of the details. And there'll be the website, and I think maybe Jasmine's information will be on there as well. So how will patients enroll? So if the child was treated at a PNOC institution, it's quite easy. You just have to talk to their physician and say, you know, I would like to enroll my child on the study, and then the investigator should be able to take it from there. If patients were treated or are being treated at a non-PNOC institution, then they are going to enroll through CHLA. And this is where Jasmine comes into play. Jasmine, you can wait. We'll introduce Jasmine to you as well in a minute. There's her picture. And we've created an email address specifically for families who are interested. It's quite easy to remember. It's just atrt@chla.usc.edu. And essentially what this will look like is the patients and families will need to reach out to their treating physician in the treating institution and essentially request the medical records. So they'll need to request the tumor tissue and the pathology report, the imaging on a CD for us to upload, and then, like I said, the medical records. And usually this, requires a medical release form to be signed, and then a little bit of legwork to help to collect all of these. But this is where Jasmine is here to help. And patients and families can actually start doing this now. You don't have to wait for the registry to open. If you know that your child was treated elsewhere and you're interested, you can go ahead and start requesting all of this. And then when it's open, then we can reach out to Jasmine and have you enroll through CHLA. So a little bit about funding. We are very excited that we have enough funds to get up and running. Team Beans was very generous and is providing us with $75,000 a year for 3 years. And then the PNOC Foundation has done a phenomenal job of fundraising. I think the last time we did a check-in, we were around $79,000 specifically for this project, which is a huge thanks to all of you. And I just put a little screenshot of what the page looked like the last time I saw it, with kind of the top individuals and top teams. And we know that you guys are doing fundraisers that are ongoing, and we're so appreciative. And then we're obviously very appreciative of our disease champions, both for their fundraising efforts and their advocacy and partnership with our working group. And then we had mentioned a congressional funding request that we are very excited to be able to put through. I put this up here because I want you all to know that lawmakers, I think all of them got reelected, those that were up, which is exciting, but this is a bipartisan letter. So there are, I think, 13 members of the House of Representatives who signed on to this letter. And I think this is important for you guys to see that, you know, these people believe in this cause. This letter, if you read it specifically, very clearly details, you know, that this money is going to be provided for research in ATRT. And we spoke to all of these members, and they really believed in the cause and signed on to this letter, which is a big deal. This language did go to the Senate. The Senate changed the language a little bit, I think, in our favor, because they actually took out the dollar amount, which leaves it open-ended, which should be a good thing for us. And then we should hear about the final language, probably, I think, the end of January. So I'll keep you updated on that. I really quickly just wanted to mention the other study that the PNOC working group is working on, and it's this adaptive clinical trial for patients with relapse disease. We're really excited about how this is going. We've got some very good candidate agents that we're looking at. We call it an adaptive clinical trial design for a number of reasons, but basically, we're hoping to have multiple arms open. I gave you some examples of what those arms could look like here. We could have a phase 1 of a novel therapy, a phase 2, you know, combination of a novel therapy plus traditional chemotherapy, perhaps a phase 2 trial of chemotherapy, but these are all different arms. And we can do all of this kind of sequentially, or even at the same time in some scenarios. And this would essentially allow a patient, if they enrolled on, let's say, this arm, and unfortunately had disease progression, they could hop over to this arm and hop over to this arm. And in writing a study like this really is a time saver for us, because as a new therapy comes in, we can just open up a new arm rather than kind of starting from scratch. So there'll be updates about that coming forward probably in about 6 months. And I just put this timeline here for you guys to see. We're still working on the development, and then hopefully we'll have approval for the study probably over the summer. And then I know we'll have space for questions in a bit, but I did want to give Jasmine the opportunity to introduce herself, so you could familiarize yourself with her and her face, as she's going to be the point person for many families for this study moving forward. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you, Ashley, or Dr. Ashley Marnell. Hi, everyone. I'm Jasmine. So I've worked at the Children's Hospital in Los Angeles for the past 7 years, and I've watched Dr. Margel work with a few different ATRT patients that we've shared through different research protocols. And I think we've both felt the kind of personal effects of losing patients and wanting to do more for this disease group in the community. So we're really grateful to the PNOC Foundation for putting funding together. We're grateful for Congress and excited about what we have upcoming. So looking forward to working with all of you and helping to build out this data set and seeing what questions you have about this process. Thank you.
Thanks, Jasmine. We're very excited to have you on board with us.
So my name's Mike Prados, I was the co-founder of PNOC, but I'm a very old guy, and these are the really smart young people that are taking care of all of this in the future. We had a few questions already in the chat, one of which I think is really important. A family member asked if they send tissue and their child is already passed, will it be molecularly profiled, particularly for methylation, so that they know what subgroup that they had? And so would the tissue be deposited, then be subjected to methylation subtyping, and then will that family be notified of really what the subtype was for their child?
Yes, the answer is yes. So if the patient was treated at a PNOC institution, then that PNOC institution can enroll the child, and the tissue will be sent to CBTN and then on for methylation profiling, and then that treating physician would get the methylation results and share it with the family. Alternatively, if the patient was treated at a non-PNOC institution, you would just reach out to Jasmine and it would be the same process. So the tissue would go to CBTN, we would do methylation profiling, and we would give you the results back.
And I just want to emphasize the fact, and maybe Alyssa, you could, that the data is actually owned by the parents and the families. This is not something that they have to negotiate. This is something that, based on regulation and law now, it is theirs to share if they want, with whom they want, whenever they want. Would you make a comment about that, Alyssa?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think many of you know now, you have, if you live somewhere where you have access to the electronic medical record, you can see notes, pathology reports, MRI reports, results, and that actually is a law. I believe it's a federal law, right? It's
The 21st Century Cures Act.
Yes. So yeah, all that information should be available to you. And I also think you can go to if it's older information or you don't have access to an electronic system, you also have the right to get it from the medical records department where your child is or was treated.
There was another great question, and maybe this is for you, Jasmine. So one of the people on the webinar asked, so to get an MRI scan, how exactly does that work to get it transferred? Is it just one CD? Do I send just the CD before surgery? Should I send CDs after surgery? What's the intent about receiving
Sure.
all of this imaging data?
So we'll be looking, that'll be partially for tumor board as a potential optional that we'll be reviewing. For the imaging data, practically it would look like they can request a CD. There's potential for some electronic transfer of data. As you previously mentioned, Dr. Prados, that's all available to the families. Even outside of this trial, they would be able to request that data and that imaging to be sent as they wish. And we'll be navigating the consent forms as they join in with the trial to ensure that we can communicate that data digitally if needed. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, it does. Tell me a little bit more about this consent process. So to help the families navigate that, if
Yes.
they're not at a PNOC site, because at a PNOC site, we can consent them just directly through the protocol. But if they're not at a PNOC site, how are they going to get consented? And
Yes, an excellent question. So the first step in that process will be reaching out via email at the ATRT email address for CHLA that we provided earlier and we'll have available on the flyers. Or they can call in to a dedicated number that we will have available for the Brain Tumor Center here at the Children's Hospital Los Angeles, and we can navigate that way. Both would be appropriate and available. And then we would be working to schedule a time with Dr. Ashley Margle for her to review that consent process, for her to review the consent and the ask of the families to ensure that this is something that they're giving an informed consent for. And of course, as every consent process, the ability to ask questions and ensure that they feel comfortable with what they're committing to or portions of what they're committing to. They don't have to agree to everything, and we'll work with that.
so can this be done through telemedicine?
Absolutely. Another excellent question. Yes, so we'll be working to ensure that everyone has an internet connection available to do so. And then we'll be connecting over a Zoom account, which will be an encrypted so that it's a secure line with Dr. Ashley Margle. And then you'll be having a consent conference over that. And we have some DocuSign that we have available. So we'll be able to do the entire process digitally. So things will be routed to email addresses that families provide, and they can do the consent process online real time without any paperwork being mailed or printed out.
So I'm really kind of interested in how the molecular tumor board is going to actually work, and who specifically will be on that tumor board, and what kind of information is going to be derived from the tumor board. Give us a little bit more detail, maybe Ashley, about the tumor board and the kind of patients that you expect to come through and what that service will be for the families.
Yeah, so this will be available to any patient who has relapse disease, progressive disease, or disease that is refractory to therapy. We will be reviewing the patient's clinical history, so mostly to figure out, what therapies they received so far and how they responded. We will also be reviewing all of the imaging. So to kind of go back to your first initial question about imaging, the more imaging you can get us, the better. So we'll be going through looking at what the tumor looked like at the beginning and what the tumor looks like now. And then we will have the results of the molecular subgroup. The members of the tumor board will include Dr. Reddy and myself, in addition to others from the PNOC working group, which include many of the physicians at the PNOC institution. So Dr. Chi, Dr. Dahl, Dr. Rob, etc. Any member of the PNOC working group can join. Any member of PNOC can join. And the patient's treating physician will be invited to join. And we very strongly encourage it because as physicians, they know the patients better than we do. And sometimes they have some great insight. So we will sit and have reviewed all of that going into the tumor board meeting. And we will discuss, based on all of these things, what we feel like the best therapy is for the patient moving forward. At this moment, we don't know a whole lot about how molecular subgroup is going to play into that decision, but we're hoping that as we move forward with our research and data analysis, we'll start to see trends and may be able to make some subgroup specific recommendations. But we'll make recommendations that include kind of what we would consider, perhaps traditional treatment methods. So for instance, if a patient hadn't gotten radiation therapy before and we felt like that was indicated, we might suggest that. We could suggest other commonly used treatment protocols such as MAMET. If there's a clinical trial open at a PNOC institution or through PNOC, based on what we're seeing, we could recommend that. And then as our clinical trial opens, again, based on kind of what the patient has gotten and the tumor location, et cetera, we may recommend that. So there's, a variety of different recommendations that we could make, and we'll always make a recommendation that we feel is best for each specific patient and their situation.
And so there'll be a report then that'll be delivered to or given to the treating physician wherever they are.
Absolutely.
That would then be shared with the family. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So this is kind of maybe this is too complicated, but I don't think it is. You keep mentioning, we all keep mentioning subgroups and the impact that subgroups have on outcome, and that the registry is truly meant to collect enough information about enough patients with specific characteristics, including subgroups, that could finally serve as a control or a synthetic control. So these are rare cancers, right? And there's not as many, but what do you think the goal would be for let's just say for sonic hedgehog ATRT, how many external control, how many people in the registry, how many patients in the registry do you think would really finally be enough to say that we would have what we need? And what do you think the timeline is for that? So just roughly, you don't have to give me a statistical answer.
That's good. I mean, I think, we feel like if the registry had about 250 patients with really good detailed data, we'd be in a good spot. I would love to see more than that. If we could get 300, I think that would be fantastic. In some ways, quality is more important than quantity. So we need to make sure that we're really able to get this detailed data and deposit it. I think we've got a pretty good chance of doing this in about 4 years. I think especially given the fact that we are going to include patients who have already been treated. We know there's about 50 patients diagnosed each year. So if we were able to get the majority of patients who've been diagnosed over the past 5 years and then moving forward, I think we'd be in a good spot. So we're aiming for 250 to 300, but the more the merrier, as long as the data is good.
And there's a pertinent question that just came in. Does the process differ for patients located outside the US? But to me, the other question or the other component of that is we could, if we reach out successfully across the globe, we're going to hit that number a lot faster.
Yeah.
And those patients are allowed to be on this registry. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. We're across the globe. I think you're right. This will obviously happen much faster. We are planning to open this at the PNOC sites internationally. There are differences in the way that we can share some of the information. So again, when you consent to the registry, there's certain protected health information that we, excuse me, like obviously do not include, and the regulations for Europe are a little bit different. Nothing that we can't overcome, just some things that we need to consider. But again, if there's patients who are at non-PNOC institutions around the globe who want to enroll through CHLA, then that is something that we can definitely make happen. It would be the exact same process. So the patients would just need to come to us with their medical records, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, and I just want to maybe share a little bit. So we have a special interest also in India, and this is going to open in Mumbai. But we're going to try and reach out to a consortium of institutions throughout India as well. When you think about a country with 1 billion people, we automatically now we can, use a multiple of 4 or 5, as opposed to what's happening in the US. And I think that's going to be a great opportunity. That's going to require more resources and more work. So the fundraising, I think, there is going to be important.
But I think, Mike, we should also mention, I mean, we went to India, was it 5
years ago
now?
Yeah.
And started talking to some of the pediatric neuro-oncologists there and realized that, they are obviously under-resourced as a group, and patients with ATRT take quite a bit of resources to treat. And so, I guess as a consequence, a lot of those patients don't receive the therapy that they necessarily should. And so one of our missions when we were over there was really to raise awareness that there are effective therapies for these children. And we've got a ways to go, but we cure quite a number of patients with ATRT. And I think I was really proud of the advocacy work that we did over there. And I think opening this registry in India and other countries is going to bring awareness to communities that if there are children diagnosed with this disease, that there are treatments, and we can share data with them and let them know, and hopefully we can help them treat these patients. I think that's a really important mission of this group.
Yeah, I think it's critical. So there's a good question here. And maybe anybody can answer. Do you share information with St. Jude, or can they not because of it being a research hospital? I think that's an interesting question, but perhaps you can answer that.
Can I just say where you're
being? Go ahead.
Yeah, of course. I mean, St. Jude is a member of our PNOC consortium, and they definitely, have expressed interest in the study and the group. So yeah, actually, if you want to address more of the specific question about sharing research, but yeah, they're definitely a part of our team.
Yep. They should be. I mean, they're planning on opening the study, at least as far as we know, and so they should be participating just like any other PNOC study.
Yeah. And Alyssa, go ahead, Jasmine.
I think it's important to clarify that when that data sharing happens, it'll be as a coded number. So this data will be available, but when you're consenting to this trial, know that it's not your name or your child's name attached to this. It'll be assigned a number. So just to distinguish, it's a little bit different in research. We're not emailing, you know, Susie had all of this happen, where 1001 had all of this happen with St. Jude.
And there's going to be a tight connection with the CBTN, right? Because we'll have bioinformatics happening with the group at CBTN to help us understand all of the information that's coming in. That'll also be coded. And eventually, all of this will be shared, not just through PNOC, but through the world, right? Because that's the point of all of this information. It's not just going to be housed only within PNOC Clinical Trials Group.
Yep.
Alyssa, here's a question. What novel agents are planned and are they subgroup specific?
Actually, let Ashley take that. We don't have, they may be in the audience, but we don't have on this part the other people involved with designing that study. But Ashley, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, still up in the air. I'll say that. I think that there's a number of different things that we're considering. Big groups of drugs, proteasome inhibition. I know somebody had asked at our last meeting if we'd worked with Lantern, and we're actually been in conversations with that company as well. We're right now really relying on the preclinical data that's coming out of Eric Rob's lab. And I'm being cryptic intentionally a bit because we haven't finalized things. We're hoping to finalize things in the upcoming months. And as soon as we have a decision made, we will let everybody know. But we're excited, actually pretty excited about the data that are coming out. And we don't want to bring anything to a clinical trial until we feel very good about the preclinical results. Yeah. But
you said that the trial could be adaptive and you could have more than one arm.
It can be. But I'm still not going to talk about what the first arm is going to be. As soon as we settle on it, I promise I'll let you know. The question about subgroup specific is if we find data that are subgroup specific, then absolutely. So if we do experiments in lab and we say this drug is really only good for this subgroup, then absolutely we will be as tailored as we possibly can. And again, that's the beauty of the way that this trial is designed, is that we have that flexibility. Right now, to be honest, the compounds that we're looking at and the study design as is will not, the first arm will not be subgroup specific. It will be for all patients. Alyssa, did you want to add anything?
No, yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think it's definitely a potential, but we're still working through that, and things happen, data comes out, so we're still figuring that out, as Ashley said. But we're hoping we can be more nimble and really identify things that make sense. But sometimes just the pathway, we don't necessarily think it's a subgroup specific treatment, and then other things might be based on preclinical data. So we really rely heavily on our preclinical working group to help. Has been great about bringing in outside speakers too, really from all over the world. So they come to our meeting and they present their research, and the group can talk about it and share ideas. And I think that's been really helpful and really gaining a lot of momentum, and hopefully integrating people. Again, researchers have been involved from Europe, Australia, and if I'm leaving, I hope I'm not leaving anywhere else out internationally, but it's really a really great group. So we're really excited and hopeful that we will be able to make progress in a meaningful way. As Ashley said, we want to be sure that we pick something that makes good sense and has good preclinical data too. And we may know something about the drugs and how to administer them, because it does take a long time to conduct a clinical trial. So you want to be, as sure as you can be that this is the best way to go.
And I think that this trial is really going to be, at least I'm really proud of the fact of how collaborative it is. So as Alyssa mentioned, we've got a lot of the data that we are working with right now is from our European colleagues in conjunction with some of the researchers here. And to be honest, some of the working group members are, from non-PNOC institutions, but they really believe in this cause and the development of novel protocols for this patient population. And everybody's great about data sharing, which I think is really amazing and important. And it's definitely allowed us to develop this study. We couldn't have done it unless everybody was really, willing to share their data and working in a collaborative fashion.
And maybe I could just emphasize the fact that it's not just subgroup, right? ATRT is composed of more than just a subgroup. It's an age of the child. It's the disease, how much is there, how much is not there, if it's spread, if they've been irradiated or not. So it's a complicated space in terms of trying to understand who responds well to what particular agent. So your first trial is probably going to be more open and hopefully informed by this registry, because that's really where you're going to be able to do the comparisons between all of those subgroups, not just the molecular, but the clinical subgroups that come into play.
Yep, for sure.
And Jasmine, so part of this, the FDA has been really strict about what they consider a good control arm. And it's not just a summary of information. It's actually what we call patient level data. I don't know if you'd like to address that a little bit, or how we're going to get all that information longitudinally over the course of a child's treatment.
Sure. So we're playing with a few different ideas, and I'm open to feedback from the families in developing this as we go. But I think that's a good point with what time points we're going to be collecting that information. I think it'll vary by the different cohorts that we have. Obviously, the families that are contributing for, that are bereaved and they're contributing for a child that they've lost, then we'll be able to do that all in one shot, with obviously opportunity to have some question and answer for maybe some missing data variables or imaging perhaps. But then for the families that are, or patients that are enrolling at time of diagnosis or at time of relapse, then we'll have a few different collection time points that we'll build in at logical intervals for that patient family.
I think it's also really a shout out to Jasmine and definitely Aubrey, who's the research coordinator on the PNOC side, because we've created these very complicated kind of like data entry forms because we really want to make sure we have every piece of data that we possibly can, and give us the best chance of the FDA saying like, yeah, this is a great external control cohort that you guys built. So it's incredibly tedious. And so we're going to apologize in advance if we come back to you multiple times and say, we need this exact piece of data. Thank you for providing all of this. We also need X, Y, and Z. And this is actually really why we have Jasmine on board with this, is she's phenomenal. She's very detail oriented and can really help you guys navigate. So if we seem nitpicky, it's for a reason. We're really trying to get as detailed data as we possibly can. And it's a very tedious process.
But that does emphasize the partnership, right?
Yeah,
It's the partnership between families and clinical scientists like you, and then the basic scientists that are giving information, and the computational biologists who are putting this all together so that can happen. And maybe this would be a point to discuss that if this is successful, what impact that will be in terms of engaging pharmaceutical companies to actually share their drug. Because if you think about a disease of 50 patients in the United States per year, there's not too many companies that are going to actually want to get involved. But if they see that this is a process or a strategy that's potentially successful from an FDA regulatory standpoint, do you think that they'd be more engaged?
Yeah, I think we have big hopes for this model. I think that we struggle in pediatrics, and especially in pediatric oncology, especially pediatric oncology for very rare diseases like ATRT, where sometimes the motivation of the drug company is challenging because, they're going to put a lot of money into research and development, and a clinical trial is very expensive. And when you only have 50 patients, per year with this disease, then the number of patients who are being prescribed their drugs is incredibly small, and maybe difficult for them to realize their necessary profit margins. And so it's definitely something that we struggle with. But if this model proves to be successful, then this dramatically cuts down on the length of time that it takes to conduct a clinical trial. It cuts down on the amount of money that it costs, because potentially you could do this with less patients. And this, could lead to faster FDA approval, which is what all drug companies really are looking for. So we think that we have a real potential to, I don't want to be dramatic, but maybe shift the paradigm a bit on how we do conduct these types of clinical trials for rare diseases and engage industry partners. And that's, again, one of the goals of this group, when we engage industry partners regularly and invite them to our meetings and have them present on their compounds and see how we can incorporate it. And we kind of hope that this might be a blueprint for other diseases moving forward. We've got diseases that, ETMR is another example, and I'm sure a lot of you interact with families of children with ETMR, and that's an even rarer disease. But if we can prove, I think, to a number of groups, I think to Congress for hopefully supporting this, the drug companies also helping to support this, patient family communities, that this is a really great partnership that has very tangible results, that we can replicate this moving forward with other disease groups and pass this knowledge on to our colleagues who are really invested in these other diseases.
I think maybe the last comment, because it's getting late, but the last comment would be that this is actually a strategy that the NCI has heard about and is enthusiastic about. There's a group in the NCI called CCDI that's just focused specifically on children with cancer. And I think that there's also some enthusiasm there, and maybe some resources that might come from the NCI, as you know, hasn't been great in supporting clinical research in pediatric brain cancer. But that actually it's resonated. They've heard, right? So the FDA's heard, NCI's heard, families have heard. This working group has made it a really important statement. And now we've got to show the world that we can do what you said, change the paradigm. And I think we can, if we have families who can really work with it. So I'm going to stop asking questions. Yeah, Bruce, do you want to wrap up? And
yeah,
finish?
sure.
Yeah.
Super punctual. So thanks for being so punctual. But more importantly, I think, for the viewers today, myself included, just invaluable insight and transparency into your latest thinking on where we are with ATRT and the clinical trial design, and the ambitious and achievable goals that you're putting out there, and in really not just changing the state of the disease, but changing the model and the way that solutions are found to change the disease. And that's, I think, what makes PNOC so incredibly special. So I want to thank the panel today. Incredibly busy schedules that you all have, to take the time out and share with us like this, invaluable. And